The old lighthouse logs documented decades of loneliness and storms, but they also contained a secret. The last keeper wasn't just watching the sea, he was feeding something that lived on the rocks. Welcome to Echoed Chronicles. For this tale, we travel to a remote, fog-shrouded island off the coast of Nova Scotia. The fog arrived before she did. It rolled in off the Atlantic in a solid, silent gray wall, swallowing the rugged coastline of Nova Scotia. For the last 20 minutes, Anya had been driving her rented Kia Forte down a narrow, winding road, the dense spruce forests on either side occasionally parting to reveal a churning, slate-colored sea. The GPS on her phone had lost its signal 10 miles back, but her instructions from the Historical Society had been clear. Follow Route 304 until you see the sign for Port Blossom, then take the next left onto Gannett Rock Road. You can't miss it. Gannett Rock Road was less a road and more a gravel track pitted with puddles from the morning's rain. The salt-laced air, thick with the smell of wet pine and low tide, seeped in through the car's vents. Anya was an archivist, a profession that had trained her for meticulous, quiet work in temperature-controlled basements. This assignment was a departure. 3 weeks cataloging the contents of the decommissioned Gannett Rock Lighthouse before they were packed up and shipped to the Maritime Heritage Museum in Halifax. It was a dream project, a self-contained world of history, isolated and undisturbed. The track ended abruptly at a wide, crushed-shell parking area. Beyond it, a long, narrow causeway of piled rock snaked out into the fog, connecting the mainland to a dark, hulking shape that she knew must be the island. The lighthouse itself was invisible, completely consumed by the mist. A single, weathered pickup truck, a Ford Ranger with a film of salt spray dulling its blue paint, was parked near a small wooden shed. As she stepped out of her car, the damp chill hit her. A man emerged from the shed, wiping his hands on an oily rag. He was tall and lean, maybe in his late 50s, with a deeply lined face and pale, watchful eyes that seemed to match the color of the sea. He wore a heavy wool sweater and work boots. "You'll be Ms. Novak," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low rumble, the accent a distinct East Coast cadence. "Just Anya, please," she said, offering a hand. "And you must be Lachlan." He looked at her hand for a moment before giving it a single, firm shake. His palm was rough as coarse-grade sandpaper. I'm the caretaker. Got your things. Just in the back. I can manage. Tide's coming in," he said, nodding toward the causeway. "We should get across. The causeway floods at high tide. Once it's up, you're on the island, till it goes down again." The statement was purely factual, yet it hung in the air with a weight that felt like a warning. Anya grabbed her 2 large duffel bags and a heavy-duty case containing her archival supplies, nitrile gloves, acid-free tissue paper, cataloging software on a ruggedized laptop. Lachlan watched her, making no move to help, his stillness a stark contrast to the swirling fog and the distant cry of a gull. They walked the causeway in silence. The only sounds were the crunch of their boots on the gravel and the rhythmic wash of waves against the rocks below. The lighthouse slowly materialized from the mist, a stark white tower rising from a small, 2-story keeper's house built of gray, salt-bleached wood. It was beautiful and impossibly lonely. Inside, the keeper's house was cold. It smelled of old wood, brine, and something metallic, like rust. The furnishings were sparse and functional, left exactly as the last keeper had kept them. Lachlan gave her a perfunctory tour, pointing out the diesel generator that powered the place, the cistern for fresh water, and the cranky propane stove. "The light itself is dead, of course," he said, gesturing up the spiral staircase that led to the lantern room. "Heritage Society had it shut down. The foghorn from Cape Sable is what they use now." You'll hear it when the wind's right. He showed her the small bedroom that would be hers. A simple iron frame bed, a wooden dresser, a single window looking out into the impenetrable gray. There's a satellite phone in the kitchen for emergencies, he said, his hand lingering on the doorknob. Cell service is spotty. Radio's better if you know how to use it. I'm on the mainland if you need anything. Channel 16. He left her then, and Anya felt a profound sense of relief as she heard his boots retreat across the causeway. She was finally alone. The silence he left behind was immense, broken only by the sighing of the wind around the tower. This was the perfect environment for her work, a world reduced to its essential elements: history, isolation, and the sea. She spent the first few days establishing a routine. In the mornings, she would work in the main room of the keeper's house, which she had converted into a processing station. She carefully unpacked the personal effects of the last keeper, a man named Thomas Keene. There were yellowed photographs, well-worn books, a collection of carved seabirds. Each item was photographed, measured, described in her digital catalog, and then carefully wrapped in archival tissue. In the afternoons, she would ascend the winding iron staircase to the library, a small, circular room just below the lantern. This was the heart of the project. The official logs of the Gannett Rock Lighthouse, dating back to 1890, bound in decaying leather, their pages were filled with the elegant script of men long dead, recording weather patterns, passing ships, and the lonely minutiae of their existence. The work was methodical and deeply satisfying. Anya would sit for hours, wearing her thin nitrile gloves, the only sound the soft crinkle of the old paper and the constant, mournful call of the distant foghorn. The world outside the thick glass windows ceased to exist. The first inconsistency was so minor she almost didn't register it. On the third day, she was cataloging a set of Thomas Keene's woodworking tools. She finished with a specific carving knife, noting its maker and the chip in its wooden handle. She recorded its location, drawer 3 of the main workbench, and placed it there herself, closing the drawer. The next morning, when she came down to start her work, the knife was sitting on top of the workbench, perfectly centered on a clean patch of wood. She stared at it, a flicker of confusion breaking her focused calm. She was certain she had put it away, absolutely certain. Her entire profession was built on such certainties. She must have been more tired than she thought. She picked up the knife, her gloved fingers tracing the chipped handle, and put it back in drawer 3, this time making a conscious mental note of the act. 2 days later, it happened again. She had spent the afternoon reading the 1974 logbook. She had stopped on the entry for November 10th, a detailed account of a winter storm, and had placed a pH-neutral bookmark at the page before closing the heavy volume and leaving it on the library table. When she returned the next afternoon, the logbook was open. Not to the page she had marked, but to an entry in early August, describing a calm, sunny day. The bookmark was gone. A prickle of unease traced its way up her spine. This was different. Forgetting to put a tool away was one thing. A heavy book opening itself to a new page and a bookmark vanishing felt wrong. She scanned the small, circular room. The windows were shut tight against the damp air. There was no draft. She looked for the bookmark on the floor under the table between the pages. It was simply gone. She tried to rationalize it. The old book's binding was stiff. Maybe it had sprung open. Maybe the bookmark had slipped out and fallen into a crack she couldn't see. But the explanations felt thin, inadequate. For the first time, the silence of the lighthouse felt less like peace and more like a held breath. She had the distinct, unnerving feeling that she was not alone. She found the bookmark 3 days later. The intervening time was a trial of frayed nerves. Anya forced herself to adhere to her routine, believing that methodical precision was the only antidote to the creeping fear. She documented every object she handled with an almost frantic level of detail, taking photographs before and after she stored them away. She started leaving subtle tells around the keeper's house. A book placed at a precise angle on a shelf, a stray thread laid across a doorway. Each morning, she would find them undisturbed, a fact that was paradoxically more unnerving. It meant the intrusions were not random. They were deliberate and timed. A game was being played, and her unseen opponent was choosing the moments. The fear was a low hum beneath the surface of her days. At night, it amplified. The groan of the old house settling, the shriek of the wind, the mournful, relentless call of the foghorn. Every sound was a potential threat. She began barricading her bedroom door with a heavy armchair before she went to sleep. On the morning of the 6th day, she decided to clean the lantern room glass. It was a menial, physical task she hoped would clear her head. Armed with a bucket of fresh water and a squeegee, she climbed the final, steepest flight of iron stairs into the glass-walled chamber at the very top of the tower. The view, even through the grimy glass, was breathtaking. The fog had temporarily receded, revealing a vast expanse of gray, white-capped ocean under a bruised-looking sky. As she began to wash the interior of the huge panes, she noticed something wedged deep in the track of a window that could be cranked open for ventilation. It was a small, folded piece of twine, her pH-neutral bookmark. Anya's blood ran cold. She worked it free with trembling fingers. It had been placed here, deliberately, in the highest, most inaccessible room in the entire structure. No draft could have carried it up 3 flights of stairs and wedged it so perfectly. Someone had taken it from the logbook and brought it here. She looked down at the island below, a tiny, isolated teardrop of rock. Beyond it, the mainland was a smudge of dark green on the horizon. She felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. The feeling of being watched was no longer a vague premonition. It was a concrete certainty. She scrambled down the stairs, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had to talk to Lachlan, and the static-filled satellite phone was not enough. She had to use the radio. She'd taken a basic maritime radio course years ago for a different project. In the kitchen, she switched on the VHF radio, the speaker crackling to life. She picked up the handset. Gannett Rock Lighthouse calling for Lachlan on the mainland. Over. Static. She tried again, her voice tighter now. Lachlan, this is Anya Novak at the Lighthouse. Please respond. Over. A voice finally broke through the hiss, distorted and distant. Got you, Gannett Rock. What's the trouble? Over. Lachlan, I need to be clear. Someone is on this island with me. They are entering the house when I'm not around. I just found my bookmark in the lantern room. Over. There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of crackling static. Anya could picture him on the other side, his pale eyes looking out at the sea, at her island. A bookmark, you say? Up in the lantern. His voice was calm, almost placid. Wind gets in everywhere up there, lass. The vents, it'll pull things up the tower like a chimney. Seen it happen. Over. This wasn't the wind, she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and frustration. It was placed there. I'm not imagining this. You have to believe me. Over. Another pause. Longer this time. All right, Anya. Calm yourself. No need to get worked up. Tell you what. I've got a supply run to make in Port Blossom. I'll stop by on my way back. This afternoon, maybe 3 or 4 o'clock. Tide depending. We'll have a look around together. Make you feel better. Over. Thank you, she breathed, a wave of relief washing over her. Thank you, Lachlan. Over. No trouble. Lock your doors. I'll see you this afternoon. Lachlan. Clear. The radio went silent. He was coming. She just had to hold on for a few more hours. The promise of another human being, of an ally, was a powerful comfort. She felt foolish for ever suspecting him. He was just a quiet, practical man. She decided to make some tea and read while she waited. The logbooks, they felt safer now, a connection to the men who had lived the same isolated life. She picked up the 1974 volume, the one her bookmark had vanished from, and settled into the armchair. She didn't look for the entry about the storm this time, but instead let the pages fall open where they would. Her eyes fell on a series of entries from the last keeper, Thomas Keene, dated in late October, just before his retirement. Most were standard reports on weather and maintenance, but one stood out. October 28th. Fog thick as wool. Horn running steady. Provisions low. The boy was back on the shore today. Left him a can of peaches. He's getting bolder. Anya frowned. The boy? There was no mention of any family or children in Keene's official file. She read the next entry. October 29th. He took the peaches. Saw him from the lantern. A thin little thing. Moves fast. Slips in and out of the rocks like an eel. I wonder what becomes of him in the winter. Her heart began to beat a little faster. She flipped back a few pages. More entries. October 22nd. Found one of my birds missing. The little sandpiper. Found it the next day on the causeway, its neck broken. Anya felt a sudden, sharp chill that had nothing to do with the cold air of the house. A missing carving. A broken neck. She thought of the carving knife left on her workbench. A boy. A thin little thing. She slammed the logbook shut. It wasn't Lachlan. It was someone else. Someone who had been here for years, maybe decades. Someone who played these same games with the last keeper. A burst of adrenaline shot through her. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was just past noon. Hours until Lachlan arrived. She stood up and walked to the pantry, her mind racing. Asterisk left him a can of peaches. On a whim, she began checking her own supplies. Tins of soup, bags of pasta, crackers. Everything seemed to be in order. Then she saw it. On the back of the lowest shelf, tucked behind a bag of flour, was a small stack of 3 cans of cling peaches she had bought in Halifax. She never ate canned peaches. She had only bought them to meet the minimum for a credit card purchase at the grocery store. 2 of the cans were coated in a light film of dust. The third was clean. Too clean. She picked it up. Felt lighter than the others. She turned it over. On the bottom, so faint it was almost invisible, was a series of tiny, parallel scratches, as if someone had tried to pry it open with a small, sharp object, like the tip of a carving knife. The realization hit her like a physical blow. He had been in here, not just in the house, but in her pantry, handling her food, testing the cans. The boy from the logbooks. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a man now. A man who had spent a lifetime on this rock. A feral, unseen presence living in the margins. He had watched Thomas Keene, and now he was watching her. The games were the same, but they had escalated. A broken bird carving for Keene. For her, an effigy of a woman bound and hanged. Lachlan wasn't a threat. He was her only hope, but he was hours away. Panic gave way to a cold, lucid clarity. She couldn't just wait here. This house was a trap, and he knew it better than she did. She had to get outside, find a place to hide until Lachlan's boat appeared on the horizon. A place he wouldn't think to look. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, the weight of it a small comfort in her hand. She went to the front door and cautiously slid back the deadbolt. It moved freely. He had wanted her to find it jammed earlier, another one of his tricks to heighten her terror. She pulled the heavy door inward, the cool, damp air rushing in. The island was wreathed in a thin, swirling mist. The causeway was still submerged under the gray, choppy water of high tide. Anya crept out, her eyes scanning the jumble of dark, wet rocks that made up the small island. There were countless places to hide. Sea caves, deep crevices, hollows in the rock. But he would know them all. Her eyes landed on the diesel shed, a small, windowless structure near the base of the tower where the generator was housed. It was the one place that was purely functional, a place of noise and machinery, not a place for hiding or playing games. He probably never went in there. She slipped across the open ground, the poker held tight in her fist, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The shed door was secured with a simple wooden hasp. She lifted it and slid inside, pulling the door shut behind her. The darkness was absolute. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and cold metal. The generator was a huge, hulking shape in the center of the small space. Anya felt her way along the wall, her hand brushing against shelves filled with oily tools and spare parts. She crouched down behind the generator, wedging herself into the narrow gap between the machine and the wall. She was hidden. She waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The only sound was the thumping of her own heart and the distant, mournful cry of the foghorn. She began to wonder if she had made a mistake. Maybe he had seen her come in. Maybe he was outside the door right now, waiting. Then she heard it. A soft scraping sound on the other side of the shed. The sound of a boot on gravel. Her breath caught in her throat. She pressed herself harder against the cold metal of the generator, making herself as small as possible. The shed door creaked open. A sliver of gray light sliced through the darkness. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway. It wasn't the tall, lean frame of Lachlan. This man was shorter, wiry, with a shock of unkempt hair. He stood perfectly still, listening. Anya held her breath until her lungs burned. He took a step inside, and then another, his movements silent and fluid. He was hunting. He scanned the small space, his head turning slowly. Anya could see his face now in the dim light. He was gaunt, his skin pale, his eyes dark and deeply set. He looked like a man who had lived his whole life in the shadows, starved of sun and human contact. He was the boy from the logbooks. His eyes swept past her hiding place. He didn't see her. He turned and slipped back out of the shed, as silently as he had entered. Anya waited, her entire body trembling, for a full minute before she dared to breathe. She stayed hidden for what felt like hours. Finally, she heard the sound she had been praying for. The low, rhythmic chug of a boat engine, growing steadily closer. It was Lachlan. Hope surged through her. She scrambled out from behind the generator and burst out of the shed, blinking in the gray afternoon light. Lachlan's small fishing boat was just bumping up against the rocks at the end of the now visible causeway. He was throwing a rope to secure it. "Lachlan!" she screamed, her voice raw. He looked up, his face etched with concern. "Anya, what is it? Are you all right?" She ran toward him, stumbling on the uneven gravel. "He's here. The man, he's on the island. He was just in the shed." Lachlan's eyes widened. He immediately scanned the rocks around the lighthouse, his hand instinctively going to the gaffing hook that lay in his boat. Where? Where did he go? As if in answer, a movement caught their eye. High above them, on the narrow walkway that encircled the lantern room, a figure emerged. It was him. He stood there, a small, wiry shape against the gray sky, looking down at them. He held something in his hand, a small object that glinted in the pale light. Carving knife. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He was claiming his territory. "Stay here," Lachlan said, his voice a low, hard command. He grabbed the heavy gaffing hook from the boat. its long wooden handle and sharp metal point a formidable weapon. "Get back in the shed and lock it." But Anya couldn't move. She was frozen, watching as Lachlan started toward the base of the tower. This had been his life, she realized. Not just a caretaker of the lighthouse, but a warden for its prisoner. Leaving cans of peaches, trying to manage a presence he could never fully control. The man on the walkway let out a high, thin cry, a sound that was more animal than human. It was a cry of fury, of a king whose private kingdom had been invaded. He disappeared back inside the lantern room. "Get out of here, Anya," Lachlan yelled, not looking back. He knew what was coming. Anya finally broke from her paralysis. She didn't run for the shed. She ran for the boat. She scrambled over the slippery rocks and tumbled into it, her hands fumbling with the rope Lachlan had just tied. She heard a crash from inside the lighthouse tower, the sound of breaking glass. She managed to untie the knot, and the boat began to drift away from the causeway. She looked back at the tower. Lachlan was gone, having vanished inside. She never saw either of them again. She drifted for what felt like an eternity before the tide caught the small boat and began pulling it slowly toward the mainland. The official report would state that there was a fire, an accident involving the backup generator and stored fuel. The remains they found were unidentifiable. The Historical Society closed the project, sealing the records. But Anya knew what she saw. She knew there was no fire. There was only a confrontation, decades in the making, between a caretaker and his ward, on a lonely rock at the edge of the world. She left Nova Scotia the next day, the mournful cry of the foghorn forever etched into her memory, a sound that no longer spoke of peace or solitude, but of a quiet, lonely darkness that had been waiting for her all along.